1. This happened in 2012. It was the summer after my freshman year of college, and I was at my parents' house. It's a ranch-style house on a hill where you enter onto the second floor through the front door. And there's a staircase that goes downstairs where you can exit to the woods outside the back of the house. My parents were away for work, they worked together, and I was planning to pull an all-nighter to meet a writing deadline for my internship. It was Saturday, and my younger brother, 17 at the time, was planning to go to some big party that night with a handful of his friends, including one of our childhood friends from the Netherlands, who was staying with us for the summer. My best friend and I agreed to drop him and his friends off and pick them up. I'll skip ahead to when we picked them up from the party. There were 5 of them total, the 4 we dropped off plus another one tagging along who I didn't know, and they were so drunk. I never heard the new kids say a word. We brought them back, and they crashed in various parts of the house pretty much immediately. My best friend and I took the California King in the master bedroom downstairs, where I would pull my all-nighter writing once she fell asleep. One of the friends crashed in the sitting room behind the bedroom. You had to go through our bedroom to get to it. Everyone else was upstairs. My brother was in his room, directly above the writing room. His other friend was in the guest room, directly above the master, and our Netherlands friend, plus the new kid, actually fell asleep, sitting up leaning on each other on the couch in the living room upstairs, across an open floor plan from the front door in the dining room area. So it's 3 a.m., and everyone except me is asleep. I had just come back downstairs after putting on a pot of coffee, and had seen the 2 boys on the couch in the same position they'd been in all night. I'd go into the bathroom at the foot of the stairs and don't bother locking the door. Just as I sit down to pee, I suddenly hear voices having a conversation upstairs, right near the top of the steps, which is also close to the front door. And it's clearly a man and a woman, so I assume something went wrong on the trip and my parents have come home unexpectedly. They weren't due back for another couple of days. Fearing they would immediately come downstairs to the room, I ran over and locked the bathroom door and finished peeing, washing my hands, etc. And all the while I can hear this animated conversation upstairs, but can't make out what they're saying, even though it's getting louder and louder. I finish up quickly in the bathroom because I need to go greet my parents and explain why we're in their bed, and all these kids who are surely awake and confused now. At least the ones in the living room are in the house. So I'm running up the stairs and the conversation is getting noticeably louder and louder the closer I get. As I'm a couple steps away from the top landing, they're fully yelling. And the moment my foot hits the top steps, silence. I look at the front door and scan the whole dining room and living room area for my parents, and no one is there. Everything is exactly the same as it was a few minutes ago when I was upstairs, including the 2 boys sitting exactly as they were before, fast asleep. I was shaking, and my heart starts pounding, keeping my back to the stairs. I back into the kitchen all the way up to the coffee pot, too scared to turn my back on the area the voices were coming from. With shaking hands, I pour another cup of coffee and stand there in shock, desperately trying to rationalize what just happened. At this point, the friend who was in the guest room comes into the kitchen, barely awake, still drunk, looking for water. I asked, "Did you hear any of that?" And he had no idea what I was talking about. I gave him water, and he went back to bed. I told myself the new kid I'd never heard speak must have a voice like a woman, and him and our friend must have woken up, had the conversation, and somehow fallen back asleep right when I got upstairs. It didn't make any sense, but I was so terrified I forced myself to accept it, at least until daylight. I went back downstairs, eventually got back to work, and once I finished, I waited until the sun came up, to try to get some sleep. A few hours later, everyone was up, and I eagerly said good morning to the new kid to hear his voice. It turned out to be far deeper than anyone else's in the house, and a sharp chill ran down my spine. I asked him and our friend if they woke up and had a heated conversation in the middle of the night, but I already knew the answer. No. In fact, as soon as one woke up and realized they were sleeping on each other, he moved to a different chair, As everyone gathered in the living room, I told them all what happened, and no one knew what to say or had any idea how to explain it. This experience forced me to allow for the existence of the paranormal, ghosts, whatever, because it's been almost 10 years and I still have no explanation. The property borders a wooded wildlife preserve that was originally home of the Minqua tribe, along with the whole neighborhood and more land beyond that. I'm not sure where this tribe lives today, and I don't believe this is even the name they call themselves. I don't know why this thought kept entering my head as I tried to figure out what happened. Maybe because I couldn't make out the conversation. The house itself was only 60 years old or so, and to my knowledge, no one died there, though the woman who lived there before us swore it was haunted. 2. I'm hoping that by posting what I've been going through I can get someone's opinion, or similar encounter. Maybe by just typing this all out I'll feel a little better at least, because I'm terrified to even let my dogs out at this point. I'm writing this on my cell phone, so I'll try to format this as best I can. Before I get into my experience, I need to first give you a picture of where I live. I live in Arkansas, about 20 minutes away from a very small town, and 40 minutes away from Fort Smith. My fiancé and I live on 1 acre of land, quite a ways from the highway, surrounded by trees. We have neighbors, but none super close to us. My fiancé's father and grandfather live in this land with us, but in their own separate buildings. The first experience happened about 2 months ago. My fiancé and I were hanging out together because she was off that day. She works from a turkey packaging plant, and is gone from 2 p.m. to anywhere from 10 p.m. to 1 a.m., and we heard a lot of rustling and movement in the bushes and trees next to our small house. So I went onto my porch with a flashlight to see what was up. I'm still hearing the sounds but not seeing anything, so I brush it off and go back inside. Well, the next day she tells me her grandpa heard stuff too, and saw 2 glowing red eyes in the trees. He tells her whatever it was taller than him, and he's about 6 feet. I hear scraping on my metal roof, which I suppose could be tree branches, but the times I hear it there's no wind. A few times I've heard light tapping on the side of my house. Sometimes I think I hear voices outside, but I'm always watching stuff on my phone or playing a video game, so I always try to brush it off as me just hearing things. My grandfather has a dog who roams around the property at night when he forgets to bring him in or falls asleep. Fluffy has been barking randomly at nights, sometimes for a few minutes to a few hours. A few nights ago, I let my dogs out to use the bathroom. I have 2 leads for them because I can't trust them not to run off. I notice while I'm getting my St. Bernard off the lead that my husky is staring up at the driveway at something I can't see. A few seconds later, she just starts cowering like she's scared and ends up peeing where she is, so I yell at her to get inside. But she does, and I start taking her lead off, when I notice Fluffy race up the driveway and start barking, so I book it inside. My husky immediately runs into her kennel and wouldn't come out the rest of the night. Not even for a treat or my fiancé, whom she adores. The day after the incident with my husky, I again let the dogs out, and as I'm letting my dogs back in, I notice 2 red glowing dots through the neighbor's fence that's about 30 feet away, and from the positioning, I can tell that they're 4 to 5 feet off the ground. I try not to freak out and do my best to calmly get my dogs back inside, where I almost have a panic attack. This was 7:30 p.m. My fiancé got home about 11 p.m., where I gained the courage to go back out with my dogs where the lights were still there. When I went to investigate the next day, they were gone, and that night, no lights. Yesterday I let both my dogs out again, and was out there for a few minutes when my fiancé comes rushing out and asks me if I'm okay. Apparently she heard a loud noise like I fell, and like my St. Bernard yelped like he was injured. I got freaked out and told her to stay outside with me, where she tells me how quiet it is outside and how she's getting a bad feeling. That's everything I can remember at the moment. I don't know what's happening, and I honestly feel as if I'm going crazy. If anyone has any answers or similar experiences, please leave a comment. I'll answer any questions as best I can. Update. So I already suffer from anxiety, depression, and have been under an unreal amount of stress lately. With that being said, until I can get my mental health and stress somewhat better dealt with, I will be pulling myself back from anything creepy or frightening, as I feel it is making me more paranoid. I want to thank those of you who have heard my story and commented and not thought I was crazy or making it up. It has helped just talking about it. Feel free to still leave a comment or message me. I will read and reply when I feel healthier. Thank you all so much for understanding. 3. I only very recently recall this memory. This is the only time in my life that I experienced something like this. I have never hallucinated before either. Perhaps it can be explained. But I haven't been able to figure out how. Maybe you will. I live in Hawaii, on the island of Kauai, and I'm a 28-year-old female. Approximately 20 years ago, I was in the island of Oahu, visiting family on my father's side. I stayed at my auntie's house with her rather large Samoan boyfriend. She was about 5 foot and on the chunky side. She has a daughter, my cousin, who was the same age as me, standing at an average 8-year-old girl's height. You'll see why this information matters. They lived in this neighborhood called Wilhelmina Rise, on the bottom floor of a 2-story house. It was set up almost like a fairly spacious studio, where the only room was the bathroom. Otherwise, you could see everything in the studio in its entirety, no matter where you were standing. There were 2 queen-size beds several feet from each other, one closest to the TV, the other closest to the back wall. I was sleeping in the bed furthest from the TV, on the inside, having the wall closest to me, and my cousin was sleeping next to me on the outside. My auntie and her boyfriend were, of course, sleeping in the other bed. I want to say it was somewhere between 1 a.m. and 2 a.m. when I suddenly woke up. I don't know if I had to use the bathroom or if something disrupted my sleep, but I could see the kitchen when I opened my eyes. I propped myself up onto my elbow to see over my peacefully slumbering cousin. I was puzzled at first as something caught my eye. I thought, I'm just imagining things, as I begin to rub my eyes and hoping to be rid of whatever was causing this potential illusion. I look up from my hands, knowing it had begun, because the explanation was that my eyes were likely just blurry, causing me to see imaginary things. Right? That's what everyone else would expect when something like this happens to someone, isn't it? But that isn't what happened. Not in this universe. After rubbing the sleep from my eyes, I look up again, and it's in the same spot as it had been. The next step is to pinch yourself, right? That's exactly what I did. Pinch, 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 on my forearm as hard as I could, to where I had to rub the pain away, definitely awake, and that is definitely standing there. My 8-year-old mind was trying to make sense of what was playing out, but it couldn't. I can't explain the confusion I felt, knowing things weren't adding up when they should be. This doesn't actually happen, except it was happening and there was no explanation. Towering in the kitchen was what looked to be a male on the slimmer side. If you took notice of the description of everyone staying in the apartment earlier, you'll understand why it was such a brain twister for me. Who is that? I asked myself silently. It stood with its back towards me at the kitchen sink. I stared at it, trying to make out any sort of detail that should have been illuminated by the dim stove light that was left on. The longer I looked at it, the less sense it made. I began to realize that, aside from it being in my kitchen, something was off about it. Why couldn't I see any details? Why can't I even see the clothing it's wearing, or the color of its skin? It was as if it were encompassed by a dark, deep, shadowy black. It was a silhouette. What does that even mean? My 8-year-old mind had no idea. I didn't know that shadow people were a thing back then. I wasn't even thinking about ghosts and paranormal things at that time. I was clueless, and didn't know what I was dealing with until very recently. The weirdest thing is that when I first looked at it, within that second, my half-asleep brain recognized it as my grandma. Until I looked harder, and made sense of where I actually was. That didn't make sense for a lot of reasons, the main two being, she's my mom's mom, therefore having no relation to anyone here except me. She was still alive and well, on my home island at that time. She didn't pass away until about a decade after this incident. After I glanced over at my auntie and her enormous boyfriend sleeping where they're supposed to be, I glanced at the front door, thinking maybe someone broke in. From where I was, I could see the chain was still on the door. So was the heavy-duty padlock, meaning the only way that locked doors opening is from the inside. The only window in her place was still intact as well. My heart was pounding at this point, and the figure still hadn't moved at all. I rubbed my eyes and pinched myself one last time, hoping I was dreaming. Please, I thought to myself, as I slowly started to lower my body back onto the mattress, keeping my eyes on whatever it was that refused to go away. Please keep us safe, and don't let anyone see anything. I stealthily flipped on my other side to face the wall and pulled the covers over my head. I didn't care how hot it was. I was not going to see the face of this thing, nor was I going to feel, hear, or witness anything it ends up doing. I silently prayed more to my parents' God, and had so much fear and adrenaline coursing through me. I thought I would never end up falling asleep. I genuinely had it in my mind that something was about to happen to me. Miracles do happen, as after a millennia passed, I did indeed fall asleep through the rest of the night without any further disturbances. I don't recall what happened the following day, but all I know is nothing was out of place, no evidence of someone MacGyvering their way into the house, and no one else mentioned anything about what I saw. I did tell my dad's mom about this recently, and she genuinely believes that I'm sensitive to anything spiritual or paranormal. She has her reasons, but that's another story. For some reason, I haven't been able to find it in me to agree with her about being sensitive. Maybe it's because I fear these types of encounters, so I consciously shut this stuff out. Maybe because I'm just too skeptical. All I do know is I'd like to never experience seeing a spooky spectral stranger in the middle of the night, ever again. 4. For some context, I'm the joint youngest of my mom's children, being one of 5 with a twin brother. However, I have 12 siblings altogether, but all the others aside from me, my twin brother, and the 3 others, share both the same mother and father. I'm not sure if it's relevant, but just to lay it all out there. As a child, I was fascinated with the paranormal. I fully understand at a young age what a spirit or ghost was, as my nan would talk about her many experiences, and she's not a woman to lie. But that's a story for another time. Before the encounter I'm about to tell you about, I hadn't had any that I could relay or remember. Just some spooky things that myself or one of my siblings apparently did, said, but like I said, I can't really remember them, so I don't think they're worth mentioning. On to the story anyhow. I was roughly about 7 years old when my mom last minute decided to take me to work with her, as she owned her own business and I didn't want to stay at home with my older sister. My sister was asleep when me and my mom left, and wasn't aware that I wasn't at home. From my twin brother and sister's point of view, this is what happened. Annalise woke up and yelled to the top of the stairs for me and my brother to come down and help tidy up. My brother apparently came straight down and helped. Meanwhile, my sister yelled once again, "Lily, come down and help now," while threatening to confiscate my computer, phone, etc. if I continued to ignore her. Getting angry, she shouted, "Lily," again, and instead of being met with silence this time, she heard me respond, "I don't care. Go away." She heard this clearly and turned to my twin brother Daniel and promptly asked, What's wrong with her? My twin brother, having also heard me respond from upstairs, just shrugged. My sister left it alone and continued with some house chores alongside my brother. A couple of hours later, me and our mum came into the house, and before I could even take another step, Annalise came up to me and angrily said, "What was wrong with you earlier?" I asked, "What?" Genuinely confused as to what she was referring to. Annoyed, she rolled her eyes at me and said, "You didn't have to give me such attitude earlier. I only asked you guys to help tidy up." At this point, I was extremely confused, and not being a confrontational or argumentative person, I started to get upset, as that was usually my response to being yelled at. Our mum, who was just as confused as me, asked Annalise what she was on about, to which Annalise responded she wouldn't help me clean up earlier. I called her name and she was rude back to me. I looked at our mother with a pleading look, and then back at my sister. "You're lying," I said. "I've been with Mum all day at work." My sister, taken aback by this, raised a brow and looked at me, then also at her mum, who nodded. "We left this morning." I remember seeing my sister's angry expression fade, and she made a look that seemed as though she was deep in thought, before telling us what she'd heard and why she assumed I'd been home. My twin brother later confirmed that he also heard my voice earlier that day. I always doubted Annalise and Daniel's version of events that day, as although I was interested in the paranormal, I was still afraid of the thought of a ghost being in our house. Well, the doubt continued until one night I was home alone. It was 2016 and I was now 13. I used to play this game that doesn't really exist anymore. Small Worlds, not that it's relevant. But I'd spend most nights on this game. I was hooked. Being home alone didn't really faze me, though I was a little sketched out as we lived right next to these woods. I felt our dog would keep me safe, despite only being this little Jack Russell Bichon Cross. Anyway, back to the main point. A few hours into gaming and listening to music, my dog was sat on my bed asleep, and I heard the front door downstairs open and somebody walk in. Not thinking anything of it, I shouted down, "Annalise?" No response, so I said my other siblings' names, expecting to hear one of them. I shrugged, not thinking much of it, and headed to my room. I picked up my phone and texted my older brother Blake, and asked if he'd just come in or not, as well as sending the same message to Annalise and to my other older sister, Katie, and my twin brother Daniel. Another few minutes passed and I decided to just go down and check, as nobody had responded to me yet. As I get to the landing, I hear my sister shout, "It's just me, don't worry," and the footsteps descending into her bedroom, which was on the other side of the house downstairs. It was Annalise who I heard. I felt a little better about it, but still had a weird feeling that I couldn't explain in my stomach. I decided to go downstairs and make a hot chocolate. While flicking the kettle on, I shouted, "Annie, do you want a hot chocolate? I'm making one." No response. A little annoyed, I opened the door and through the small corridor and opened her door. Before I could even say anything, I noticed that her room was empty. Freaked out at this point, I thought maybe she just went back out and tried to rationalize everything. I went back to the kitchen, and that's when I saw something that made my heart drop into my stomach, the front door key. It was on the kitchen cabinet, untouched and unmoved from where my mum had left it. Feeling sick at this point, I tried the handle to the front door, and to my horror, it was locked. This freaked me out so much, because remember earlier when I said I heard that door open and footsteps come in? Yeah, I thought, screw the hot chocolate, and made a beeline for the stairs, getting back into my bedroom and shutting the door once myself and my pup were safely inside. I went to grab my phone to ring one of my siblings or my mum, and to my disbelief, all my siblings had replied saying that they hadn't come home. I called Annalise, wanting this to be some stupid prank that she was trying to pull, as it was her that I had heard. To my surprise, she answered. She never answers the phone, and said, "What's wrong?" I said rather abruptly, "Did you just come home?" My sister sighed, as if I asked the stupidest question in the world, and replied, "Can you not hear the background?" With that I listened. It was rather obvious that she was at a party. At this point I began to cry as I told her what had happened. She comforted me the best she could, and said she'd make her way home shortly, and to just stay in my bedroom. Nothing else happened that night, but when my sister got home, she asked me if I remembered that day she told me what happened when I was about 7. And as if I had just unlocked memories I didn't realize were still there, I said, "Yeah, actually I do." And we just shared a look of being slightly disturbed. It was after that night I fully believed my sister's version of events that day she had heard me, despite me not being home. There were a few smaller incidents of the same thing. My brother using the bathroom and realizing there was no toilet paper. I'd shouted for my other brother or one of us to grab him some. He heard my twin brother shout, "Okay," and then, well, nothing. And then my brother realized that we were all at school and nobody else was home. He was supposed to be at school too, but was skipping. And to clarify, in all these stories, the person whose voice had been heard was not home. I've only told this story once or twice, and I'm usually met with people saying that it didn't happen and that I'm lying. But I know for sure what I heard that night, and I believe my sister and my brother heard what they did too. However, I'm 18 now, and I still can't figure out what this was. If anybody could give me their opinions or similar experiences, I'd be super grateful. It's been sitting heavy on me for years, not knowing. 5. Since I was little, I've always been susceptible to things that other people cannot perceive. Anecdotes similar to the one I'm going to tell, I have several of. They always told me I had some kind of gift, and that's why I saw or heard things. Sometimes I'd have premonitions in dreams based on problems, death, etc. Just like when they tell you that if you dream that your teeth bleed, it means someone is going to die. Something like that. But my dreams used to be darker. When I was around 5 years old, I would tell my mom about my travelings at Disney and the Tower of Paris, places I had never been. She just thought it was my imagination, like every mother in that case. But it was not until one day that they found me sitting on the floor with my eyes wide open without responding to her call, that after a while, when I reacted, I went straight to tell her that I had travelled again. They then came to the conclusion that I had the ability to astral travel even while awake. Over time they told me that those things that I could do unconsciously, plus everything that I already saw or could guess, was something dangerous, and that I would not look to have more experiences like these. And it was like that for several years. I was in college. I was 17 years old, more or less, and I was a big fan of playing cards with my friends when I had free time. All the games that could be played. I'm not a gambler. I only did it for entertainment. My grandmother was not okay with it because, to put it gently, she was a compulsive gambler herself. The thing is, one day at home, I got it into my head. Oh, and if I read letters? And I began to search the internet for what it was like, what each letter meant and how to interpret them. How to explain, I only read it once and all the information stayed with me, as if it were something I already knew but had forgotten. I started trying to read them. I did it with 5 people. An important fact is that I used the same cards that I took to the university to play, not new ones. As the days went by, I'd have trouble sleeping. My sleep was disturbed. I woke up in the middle of the night annoyed. I didn't have nightmares or anything, so I was a bit exhausted. One day I fell asleep in my room around 2 p.m., and that's when I had it. The worst nightmare I could ever have had, and boy, have I had a lot. The dream began with me in the kitchen of my house taking care of my neighbor's daughter. At that time she was approximately 8 years old. And out of nowhere, through the roof of the garage, a man entered with an appearance that, despite the fact that it was grotesque, was terrifying. It was like seeing a Viking, a very tall and muscular man with somewhat long hair and tattoos on his chest. Obviously, he was looking to hurt us. I tell the girl to run, and I'm face to face with this man who, despite the fact that he looked human, did not feel like one. I managed to grab a knife from the silverware. It was like cutting meat, very big, but we didn't really have any knives like that at home. And I tried to defend myself, but it was useless. He managed to take the knife from me and started attacking me, making numerous wounds in my body. Not like stab wounds, but cuts. He wanted me to suffer. I already knew I was dreaming, an ability that I still have, and I started punching myself to try to wake up, but I couldn't. And that was something totally new. After he hurt me and I was all cut up and covered in blood, I managed to run and get out the garage door, but he hit me from behind and I fell down. I turned around, face to face with myself, and just when I was holding the knife to stick it in my chest, out of nowhere, a kind of trident appeared in my hands like Poseidon's. Very bright gold, so much so that it dazzled a little, and when I could, I nailed it to this man I had on top of me. The strangest thing was, when I did it, it wasn't like I buried him and he fell dead or ran away. It was just when I touched him with this thing that he appeared in my hands. He totally disappeared. He vanished. I managed to get up and walk inside the house when my family was already there. But I had a crying crisis and my mom, in the dream, began to shout my name over and over again to calm me down, until I woke up in bed. Completely drenched in sweat, hair totally wet and my clothes the same. I got up, and the figure of my body was marked with sweat on the sheets, and I was still crying. The feeling I had so indescribable. Because I felt that I had open wounds all over my body, on my face, on my arms, and my chest. Wounds that this man had inflicted on me in my dream. To the point that I had to run to the mirror to see myself, to be able to confirm if I was really hurt. But it wasn't like that. I was totally fine. I went downstairs and asked my mom if she was calling me, and she said yes. I yelled at you several times to come down. I didn't know you were asleep. You left 10 minutes ago. I was petrified because, I swear, for me it was hours and hours of fighting in that dream. And it seemed shocking to me that in reality I had only been asleep for approximately 5 minutes. I hugged her and started to cry, thanked her for waking me up, and told her my dream. As I did so, the hair on her skin would stand on end. She told me to talk to a cousin who knew about these things to see what she thought. I communicated with her, and when I told her about the dream, she asked me if I had been sticking my nose in things that I shouldn't have, and I told her about the letters. Upset, she asked me if the letters were veiled. I told her no. She asked me if I did some protection before reading. I told her no. And finally, she asked me if the cards were new at least, and I said no. She told me to burn them immediately, because, being playing cards, they had been through many hands, and by including them in something like reading cards, the fact that they had been through so many hands sucks the energy out of people, good or bad, and by reading them without protecting yourself, I could have attracted something unwanted, and because of my dream, I actually attracted something that was not good, which could even be the devil himself. I go with this story to my grandmother, and we went directly to burn them. The strangest thing happens here. The playing cards that I used were made of cardboard. They were not laminated or anything like that. We poured gasoline on them and tried to light them, but they didn't burn. No matter how many matches we threw at it, it just wouldn't burn. My grandmother looked for an old prayer book from the 30s that belonged to her grandmother, and looked for a prayer which she began to recite. When she finished, we tried again, and they burned. While they were being consumed, the smell they gave off was disgusting. My grandmother said it smelled like sulfur, but I don't know. I don't know what that smells like. When it finished burning, the residues were as if plastic had melted, which is illogical because, as I said before, they were cardboard. After that, I promised not to read letters again, and to this day I've kept my promise. I don't want to live something like this again. Hey everybody, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to 5 True Paranormal Stories, episode 267. And thank you very much to everybody who allowed me to use their stories in this video. If you enjoyed the video, then please do like, subscribe, and comment, and share the video around with all your friends and family. Before we go, I would like to give a little shout out to the author of story number 4. Well, their YouTube handle is Fandomsholic. Or Fandomsholic, but I think of Fandomsholic. It makes a little more sense. I'll drop a link to their channel in the description next to their story. Okay, and I think I'm going to wrap things up there for now. I'm feeling a little tired today. Need to go rest my bones, I think. So I can then do some more work tomorrow. So until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourself.